Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. I am your host, Matt Bowers, 32nd Degree. And a short time back, Brother Maynard Edwards had the opportunity to speak with Brother Stephen L. Harrison. He is the past master of Liberty Lodge number 31 in Liberty, Missouri, who recently wrote a book called The Imperfect Storm, which is a chronicling of events regarding the infamous Morgan affair, which, if I were to read directly from the cover of the book, it's the 19th century's most infamous cold case, and it certainly involves Freemasonry. This was a pretty in-depth chat that Brother Maynard had with Brother Stephen, and without giving away too many spoilers. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation between Brother Maynard Edwards and Brother Stephen Harrison.
You've written several books, and you've got a new one out that really caught my attention regarding the Morgan affair. So why don't you give us sort of the back cover blurb, if you will, and then I've got a bunch of questions for you.
I became interested in the Morgan affair several years ago, and I discovered sometime around 2005 that there was a series of letters that might describe his life in the Cayman Islands after he disappeared. Now, that's not the only theory of what happened to William Morgan, but that got me interested. I wanted to find those letters. So, in a nutshell, William Morgan was a guy who came into Batavia, New York in 1826, and he was probably an imposter Mason. But he did join a lodge. He joined the York Rite, and then they had a falling out over a couple of things. Morgan threatened to reveal Masonic secrets, writing a book about the Freemasons. The Masons took exception to that. They kidnapped Morgan and took him to Fort Niagara, New York. He disappeared, and the mystery begins at that point.
And it's a story that has fascinated Masons for a long time. And at the time, that incident was sort of the spark that led to the greater fire of the anti-Masonic movement of the late 1820s into the mid 1830s. It started that political movement, which was more anti-Jackson than it was anti-Mason, because several of the folks who were the head of that movement were Masons themselves and knew what they were saying was not real. So, but it played into it. But it all starts with that mystery, as you said, and there's so many little twists and turns to it. Now, I've been to Batavia, New York, and I've been to the powder keg, where the powder room where in Fort Niagara where Morgan was held, and it's a pretty fascinating place to walk through. And I don't want to give away the book, but you mentioned several of the theories as to what happened to Morgan, because his book did in fact get published after his disappearance. And it's one that gets talked about quite a lot. So if you can you expand on a couple of the theories that maybe the book touches on?
Well, shortly after Morgan disappeared, I say shortly, about a year after he disappeared, I think the first volley on that was fired when a body washed up on the shores of Lake Ontario, and they immediately declared the body to be Morgan. People wanted an inquest, so they had buried the body. They dug him up again. They had a big inquest. His wife came. Everybody assumed it was Morgan, and they buried him again. And then a woman by the name of Mrs. Timothy Monroe came along and said, "No, it's my husband." And she gave a great description of the clothes he had been wearing. It probably was Monroe, but they buried the body for the third time, and that was it. Now, that's not exactly a sighting of Morgan after he disappeared, but it was kind of the first time they started publicizing this in the newspapers. There are stories that they followed him up through what we would call the Toronto area, on up to New England. There are a couple of sightings in or near Maine. There was a sighting in Boston that got some press. There is speculation that he caught a boat to Smyrna, and there are several stories about his life in Smyrna and different takes on that life from a lot of people. Many of the people who told these stories seem to be level-headed people, and many of them seem to be kooks. But and not just for Smyrna, but for other places as well. And then, of course, we've got the thing that piqued my interest were the letters that said he went to the Caribbean. I dug up something that I think has never been told before, was his life with the Seneca Indians right there in the Batavia area on the Tonawanda Reservation. And we talked about that at length. A couple of others, and as I said, they have varying degrees of believability. So what I wanted to do was just not speculate on them, but document what I could find in the way of mainly newspaper articles or other articles from books that talked specifically about each sighting.
So the one with living with the Native American tribe, that's a new one on me as well. I hadn't heard that one until you just said it. So I've heard the various other ones, the escape into Canada, I'd heard I believe about the Caribbean, and of course there's always the theory that he drowned in the Niagara. But as you point out, the only body that they've ever found, it's very unlikely that it was so long after Morgan's disappearance that if he'd been in the water, either somebody had been holding him for a very long time. If he'd been in the water all that time, there wouldn't have been much of him left for them to be able to find. So it's unlikely that was, but they really needed a body at that point in time to push forward with the political angle of things. So tell me a little bit more about the Native American connection and how you discovered that.
Of course, you said there was only the one body. Actually, there was another body that was found. When I do the presentation on it right at the start, I promise people 2 bodies, 3 graves, and a bonus grave. So the second body was found in, I believe it was 1881, summertime, maybe June. And there are a couple of theories surrounding that body, but it does play in to the theory that he went and lived with the Seneca Indians. One of the, a town photographer in Batavia by the name of William Wakeman wrote a book that did not get much press that I ran across. He was, as I said, the town photographer, and he was also he photographed the entire Seneca tribe and all the people that lived on the reservation there. They came to like him very much, and they made him a member of the tribe. And in fact, the only picture I have of him is in full Native American regalia. I found his book, which details Morgan's life with the tribe there. It came down I would say the chain of the people telling the story clear down to his time is pretty solid. And one of the main proponents was a guy by the name of Eli Parker. And he got most of his story from Parker or someone who came right after Parker. Eli Parker was a Native American. He was a member of the tribe. He was also a good friend of Ulysses S. Grant, a man with impeccable credentials. He not only was at Appomattox with Grant, he was inside the room where Lee surrendered, and he drafted the final surrender document for Ulysses S. Grant. So his credibility is there, and their story is that he was brought to the Seneca tribe on the Tonawanda Reservation and lived out his life there and died in 1829. And that the second body that was found and reported, by the way, by the New York Times was Morgan's body. They found artifacts that went with it, which included the name of a prominent Mason on a manuscript, and they could only make out part of it. The words kill and Masons and a few other things that they could make out were on this document. And they found a ring inscribed with the initials WM. So it's part of the Morgan lore, and there seem to be some people talking about that story that are, as I said, level-headed people that aren't trying to promote themselves.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a few of the facts about Morgan, because there are people who are coming into this for the first time, which, as Masons, it's hard for us to think that people don't already know the story, because even still, when in Masonic circles, people, they whisper the Morgan affair. They don't, nobody blasts it out loud. It's still one of those things that's such a challenging thing for Masons to talk about, and feelings get involved. But the facts of the matter are, as we know it, William Morgan, he was a Virginian by birth, we believe, and claims to have served in the War of 1812, although I'm not certain that was proven. Did you have any opinion on whether or not the history of where he came from before he made it to Batavia, New York, what the accuracy of what's been reported?
I try to avoid opinions. I tried to go with facts. I did find one document that really detailed his participation in the War of 1812 and told the story of how he got the rank of captain. Again, I try to avoid opinions. I just report that story as I found it.
So he's a bricklayer and an actual Mason. And at some point in time, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a boom happening in the upstate New York area as people are building and constructing things to go along with the construction of the Erie Canal, which was under construction at that point in time. So he goes up into the northern part of New York looking for work, and while he's there, comes across the lodge and says he's a Mason, but as you mentioned at the beginning, he's a Callan. He's a guy who's got the word, but doesn't seem to have any of the rest of this, but nonetheless receives some of the Royal Arch degrees. And this is where he starts to run afoul of Masons, because he starts openly discussing that he's going to get rich publishing a book. And I don't know, maybe and I don't think anybody's ever gotten rich publishing the secrets of Masonry. I don't think anybody's really made any money off of it much at all.
Somebody once told me, if you're a Masonic author and you sell 2 copies of your book, you're a bestseller. So I think you're right on that one.
You are not wrong. So, and then from all reports, he was kind of a jerk and rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and so they took immediate dislike to him. And this is how he got on their bad side, and it had less to do with the lodge and more to do with he was just kind of a jerk. He was at some point arrested on a trumped up charge, and the Masons came and paid his bail. He was seen screaming as he was being taken from the jail after his bail had been paid. It was a stolen shirt, if I'm not wrong, mistakes. It was laundry of some kind, or a garment of some kind.
Yes, it was a shirt and tie. He had many other debts as well.
And so they pay to have him released from jail, and that's the last time he was seen alive. And all the other reports, the Fort Niagara and him being tossed into the river and all those things, we don't have any proof of any of that, really.
Really none. That's very solid.
Now, this did come to trial, and the trial is also a matter of a lot of, I think, misreporting. So can you talk a little bit about what happened at the trial as Masons were brought on trial, several of them, and community members were brought on trial for Morgan's disappearance, despite not having a real body?
True. 47 Masons were indicted. Of the 47, 9 of them were actually convicted and sent to prison with a term that ranged from, one guy only got a month, and the most severe penalty was 2 years and 4 months. Kidnapping at the time was not a felony. So the sentences were very light for having kidnapped somebody. Plus, due to some legal wrangling, they really were never tried for kidnapping. They were tried for conspiracy to kidnap Morgan. So, as I said, those 9 got some form of prison sentence, and the guy that got the main sentence was the sheriff of Genesee County up there. And all he really did, he kind of got late into the conspiracy, but they contacted him and said, please arrange a jail cell for Morgan for when we bring him up there. There were others that would have been convicted who either ran from the law or died before they could go to trial.
Now, this is where the sort of politics gets involved. There's public outrage that there were light sentences and not only 9 of the 47 were convicted. And so it's at this point that Thurlow Weed, who's a newspaper publisher in New York, picks this up, and he's anti Andrew Jackson. And this is, smack in the middle of Jackson's presidency, anti-Jackson politics. And here's this story about the Masons doing bad things. And lo and behold, Andrew Jackson, he's a grand master of Masons. He's not just a Mason, he's a grand master. So, this is where politics begins to get involved, and the story starts taking on a life of its own. In the book, do you touch on any of the anti-Masonic movement, or are you sticking strictly with the case at hand of the disappearance and alleged murder?
We definitely pick up on the anti-Masonic movement both before and after the Morgan affair. If I had just, written a book about the Morgan affair, there had been so many books written, there wouldn't have been any point in doing it. The book starts out with a look at, first of all, what happened in the state of New York that was probably a direct cause of initiating guys who probably did not belong in Freemasonry, who would be arsonists and thieves and kidnappers and maybe even murderers. And then we really go into sort of the history of anti-Masonry up until the Morgan affair. I've told people in the book, you don't even really meet William Morgan until the 3rd chapter. Then after it was all over with, it talks extensively about the anti-Masonic politics, the people who were involved, and takes that up through the construction of the big monument in Batavia, which in a way was almost the swan song of anti-Masonry or the anti-Masonic movement in the 19th century.
Yeah, and for folks who haven't seen it, it is a really large monument. It's probably maybe 25, 30 feet tall. It's very large. And, there's a statue of Morgan at the top of it that is a little odd looking, if you ask me. And I think that's on the cover of your book, isn't it?
It is on the cover, yes.
It's an interesting looking monument. It's in the middle of a graveyard, but that graveyard is right on the corner of where the old train station would have been. And it was placed there specifically so that when people got off the train from, all different points, whether they're coming from further upstate or they're coming from New York City or wherever, as you get off the train, the first thing you see is this giant monument to anti-Masonry.
It's quite a sight.
It is.
I did think it was going to be in the middle of the cemetery, given
me too.
what I had seen, and I was surprised to find out its location.
Yeah, I went into the cemetery early one morning just by myself, and was wandering around with my camera looking for this, and I didn't realize quite how tall it was, waiting for this thing to jump out in front of me in the middle of the cemetery. And finally, I gave up and looked on, find a grave, and looked at the monument and found the exact coordinates. And as soon as I turned, and I was like, wow, there it is. It's all but in the street on the way to the train station. So one other person who's always been of a fascinating character in this whole saga. And again, I don't know if you touched on it. I ordered a copy of the book and I haven't gotten it yet, but I just ordered the book the other day. So is Morgan's wife at the time. And is it Lucinda Morgan? Is that her name?
That is her name.
She was Lucinda Morgan and then became Lucinda Morgan Smith, because after Morgan disappeared, she was still there in the town, but she met up with Joseph Smith, who would go on to found the Mormon Church, and himself would be the victim of foul play, so to speak. And She's always been a pretty fascinating character. Any insight into her that comes up in your studies?
I didn't do too much about it in the book. In fact, I think most of her story is in a footnote that I put in there. It is correct. She eventually, shall we say, got together with Joseph Smith. They were sealed by the Mormon Church. Then I guess don't call it marriage. They were sealed by the Mormon Church in 1846. The thing about that is Joseph Smith died in 1844. So they had probably had some sort of an affair in Nauvoo, Illinois. They were sealed for eternity a second time in 1899 after they were both dead. There are documents showing that, but that I know of, they never together had a real wedding ceremony. It's kind of controversial to say that they were married unless you buy into the sealing that was done posthumously for Joseph Smith.
Well, right, because he was a proponent of having plural wives, so she was one of several. But I'd always thought it was just an odd coincidence that, because Joseph Smith was in fact a Mason, and Morgan claimed to have been a Mason, so connection there. Both men disappear under Joseph Smith didn't disappear, but both men fall to foul play, as to the best we can tell, and just her being that common element in there makes you. A modern day detective would certainly look under that rock, and what role did she have in any of this? So after you have discovered the letters and things, what was your research process like? Because you mentioned newspapers, and obviously there are lots of ways now to look at those historic newspapers that have been previously difficult to look through. You don't live in Batavia; you're in Missouri, so obviously there's a distance challenge there, short of relocating yourself. So what was your research process like in order to come up with some of the new information you have?
My research process started with those letters. And after I read about their existence, and as I say, this was probably in 2005, the article that I read said that they were located in the Bentley Library on the University of Michigan campus. I contacted those people and they said, no, we do not have that material. So that was discouraging. I attempted to contact the Grand Lodge of Michigan and I got no response, but in their defense, I don't think I didn't go through proper Masonic channels or anything like that. And I just kind of laid it aside, maintained a passing interest in it. And over the years, I did a couple of magazine articles on Morgan, produced 2 videos, and then during the pandemic, so we're talking 15 years later, those letters were eating at me. And I said, I'm going to try that library again. By the time I got out there, they had put their entire catalog online. Not the documents, but the catalog.
So you're talking about the University of Michigan Library?
University of Michigan Library. And I went to their website and there they were. All the documents were listed there that I wanted. It took me a while to get up there because it was during the pandemic and you had to sign your life away to get in, but I finally did. I found the letters. I found additional materials within the boxes that came from a brother by the name of Charles Fay. He was not the Grand Master in Michigan. I believe he was the Grand Historian. And the series of letters, the man named I. Dwight Hunter had written the Grand Master of Michigan and said he was a relative. He was married to the great-granddaughter of William Morgan in the Caribbean. And that's when I started following through on that. There were that series of letters, a series of letters between the members of the Grand Lodge of Michigan, wondering why didn't we follow up on this? What's going on? The letters were lost for a while. I found pictures, and that's where I found a copy of the book by William Wakeman that talked about his life with the Seneca Native Americans. From there, my initial thought was there had been so many books written about Morgan that at least I was going to publish those letters. So nobody would ever have to go through that again. And the more I looked into it, the more I said, no, there's a book here. If I expand on the causes and effects of the Morgan affair, which I think is an important thing to study. So I started, as you said, going through every newspaper I could find. It wasn't that difficult. I mean, the Morgan affair was a big, big deal in the 19th century. And I found lots and lots of articles, including an article that, said that second body had been found and all of that. And of course, the good old standard internet searches that led me to another man who was not a Mason, but who claimed to be the great-great-grandson of William Morgan in the Caribbean. And his essay that he wrote corroborated everything that was in those letters. And along with that, he had genetic testing done and found that his family was related to the families of the Morgans in New York. So now you've got a genetic link between the two Morgans. And I followed up on that, and just in some cases, just blind luck, stumbling on things.
So are you revealing here that there is a person claiming to be a living descendant of the Captain William Morgan, and he's still walking around breathing air?
Unfortunately, he passed away in December.
Oh, no.
I had 3 interviews with him before he died. There are many living descendants of Morgan walking around. We found some of them. And as we tried to, follow the genealogical links between the two families.
So, I guess the question is, can this mystery really be solved? Can we really say, even if we can't figure out who done it, can we say Morgan escaped with his life out of Fort Niagara, if that is indeed where he ended up, or that he probably is somewhere on the rocks of the Niagara Falls? So where are you at this point? Again, I don't want to give away the ending of the book, but and you say you stay away from opinions, which I think you're wise to do so. Do you think this mystery can be solved with some, definitely?
Well, would it be discourteous just to say no spoilers?
No, I think that's a great answer. Now, because I already want to read the book. You've already got the book.
I'll tell you this. Going through the research for this book for me was an incredible roller coaster ride. And I would just like to take the reader through the same roller coaster ride.
That's a great way to describe the whole Morgan affair story in general. There's so many little twists and turns, and it's, I don't want to compare it and not to be unkind, but it isn't unlike the JFK conspiracy that every time you turn over one rock, you find more rocks, and you keep turning over different things. And it's just such a fascinating thing. Did you encounter much as you contacted the libraries and various things other than the COVID situation? Did you encounter much pushback? People who just say, leave this alone or anything of that? I mean, to me, this is still one of the most fascinating stories in all of Masonic history.
Not a lot, but definite pushback from the descendants of New York Morgan. Now, we from the guy who was related to Morgan in the Caribbean, we got all kinds of information, and we talked to his family. They literally gave us their entire genetic history.
Wow, that's awesome.
We did not get cooperation from the Morgans that on state side, even though we found a few of them.
Well, I wonder if for them it's not the same as it is for Masons, where there's a certain amount of this that's whispered in family lore that they don't like to talk about. This is a bad thing that happened. We don't want to talk about it too. So folks down in the Caribbean, it's kind of an exciting story, but maybe a little more, I don't know, regarded with a little bit of family shame in New York.
I think that's a good assessment. But let me say one more thing about the Morgan who was related to the guy in the Caribbean. He had a massive essay out there with a lot of speculation, but as I say, he corroborated the letters that had gone to Michigan. And a problem with doing research like this, where you reference websites, is that I found all of that on his website. And now he has died. And I think what has happened is he did not pay for the URL
Oh,
after
no.
he passed away, and his website is completely gone. Now, I have the information that was on it, and I probably will publish it again somewhere. But if you read the book and follow that link, the stuff is just gone. So on the one hand, I certainly didn't make that up. And on the other hand, we got it just in time to have that corroboration.
I was up in New York over this past week at the Livingston Library, and I have some good friends there. Brother Michael Rocco, who is a wonderful friend, librarian there, and he and I were talking about Santa Anna and his Scottish Rite patent and the discovery of it not too long ago, and one of the legends as to how that Santa Anna escaped several times with his life. That as a Mason, he was seen giving the secret Masonic sign and was able to be released. There's always been a theory that Davy Crockett at the Alamo gave Santa Anna that same sign, and that Santa Anna told Crockett, run off and do whatever you want, just, live a quiet life and let everybody think you're dead. And that Crockett somehow escaped with his life. But Crockett historians have long said there's just no way. He might have gone and kept his mouth shut for a couple of weeks or a couple of months until the heat died down. But Davy Crockett, regardless of any promise he made, as a human being, would not have been able to just go quietly away and shut up for the rest of his life. It just wasn't in him. Morgan strikes me the same way, in that here's a guy who has sort of made a reputation of being a pain in the behind and wants to, poke at people and poke at Freemasons and publish books and things like that. He sort of made a habit of making a nuisance of himself. After what happened in New York, after the disappearance, if he had escaped with his life in some way, wouldn't he have been a larger personality wherever else he ended up? So if he escapes to the Caribbean, wouldn't he have been equally a pain in the butt there? The leopard doesn't change his spots, so to speak. What are your thoughts on that idea?
I
know that's a big question.
Yeah. I've got documents on both sides of what you're asking. And one of them was that I can think of in particular. He ran into an old friend on the East Coast, and he told him everything. And he said he was coming back to collect money for the book. And, the guy said, well, I knew Morgan before, and I know I was talking to Morgan. And but yeah, he was very open about what he had done. There are other stories, particularly in Smyrna, that he was very secretive, that he was not about to talk about it, that he feared the Masons. He didn't want to be found out. And the same type of stories also come out of the Caribbean, that he was a reclusive guy. The Caribbean story says he didn't even want to be buried in a marked grave, and that when people ask him about it, he wouldn't say a thing about it. So it kind of goes both ways.
Well, it's a fascinating story. I can't wait to get a copy of the book. Where's the best place for folks to get the book?
You can get a copy of it on eBay, and I've got it. I think it's listed at $30 there. I've gotten many books on Amazon. A Kindle book is easy to get on Amazon.
Yeah,
and that will be out this summer. But for right now, the best place to get it is eBay.
Well, Brother Steve, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time and your insight here, and I can't wait for a time when we can get wide release on that so that everybody can read it. It's been it's like I said, it's been a subject of fascination for me for a while, and especially I recommend people that are interested in this, go to Batavia, put your eyes on the ground and see the thing for yourself. It's a pretty it's a pretty interesting thing to look at firsthand. But Brother Stephen's done a lot of the work here for us and uncovered some things that would take a lot of us a long time to get to. So thank you for continuing to work on the mystery and for sharing some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
And I appreciate your time as well.
Once again, thank you to Brother Stephen Harrison for taking some time out of his day to talk about his new book, which you can purchase on eBay. I will include in the show notes just how you can find this book, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I'm hoping to enjoy it when I get my hands on it. So until next time, thanks for tuning in to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. Like, subscribe, and share. I am your host, Brother Matt Bowers, and we'll see you next time.